just because I want to put this on YouTube, I'm going to read through the whole thing. Here's a mental exercise. If I say all black people were made by God to be slaves, does that make me an evil-minded person? Why? So if I say this, what does that make me? Quote, in effect, the Mishnah prescribes the same mode of acquisition for wives as the Canaanite slaves and real property, quote, by money, by deed, or by usurpation, close quote. In the case of a wife, intercourse constitutes usurpation, close quote. Chattel or person, the status of women in the Mishnah. Judy Romney Wegner, Chapter 3, The Wife, Marriage, Acquisition of a Wife, page 42. Quote, from ChatGPT. In this context, the quote is discussing the legal mode of acquiring a wife according to the Mishnah, which is a foundational text in Jewish law. It explains that the Mishnah specifies similar methods for acquiring a wife as for acquiring Canaanite slaves and real property, which include acquisition by money, by deed, or by usurpation. The term, quote-unquote, usurpation is used metaphorically here. In the case of acquiring a wife, it suggests that sexual intercourse serves as a means of acquiring or establishing the marital relationship. Is that consensual? It's not specifying here. But do slaves consent to being slaves? So are they saying consensual sex, or are they just hoping that your mind infers consensual since you might be a different type of person than them and think that consent is more sacred than marriage, which obviously is anti-Jewish. That's the whole point, okay? Because you're inferior to them. So the term usurpation is used here metaphorically. In the case of acquiring a wife, it suggests that sexual intercourse serves as a means of acquiring or establishing the marital relationship. In other words, according to the Mishnah, once a husband and wife, they throw in wife. But again, when there's a slave and a master, how does it work? Do they engage? Hey, well, let's make a deal, buddy. Husband and wife engage in sexual intercourse. It is considered a form of usurpation, not consent, usurpation, or a way of formalizing their marriage, their or his claim of property. Okay? This reflects a historical perspective on marriage. This is ChatGPT. This reflects a historical perspective on marriage acquisition within the cultural and legal context of the Mishnah. It's important to note that legal and cultural norms have evolved over time, and this perspective may not reflect contemporary views on marriage and acquisition, which means that human society has edited God's sacred teachings. So if you believe that God's teachings are superior to humans, what length are you willing to go to make sure that you protect the sanctity and the true nature of your God's teachings versus the evil, manipulative, altering influences of contemporary views on marriage and acquisition? Okay? All right, continuing on. This is me again. So we see here how brainwashing works in real time, as any American woman or girl is obligated under massive powers of coercive aggression to make up a justification for Jews to say of an entire gender, leaving out child status in Judaism, what an evil racist says about specific segments of the species, but in good-hearted religious devotion and not sick-minded, twistedly evil, blatantly delusional insanity. See the difference? Quote, it is this ideological abrogation to the authority that constitutes the principal cognitive basis of obedience. If, after all, the world or the situation is as the authority defines it, a certain set of actions follows logically. The relationship between authority and subject, therefore, cannot be viewed as one in which a coercive figure forces action from an unwilling subordinate. Because the subject accepts authority's definition of the situation, action follows willingly, close quote. Obedience to authority. Stanley Milgram. Milgram is a beautiful name. It's Hebrew for pomegranate. This guy's Jewish and his family all died in the Holocaust. 1973. Back to me. Now, imagine if a black person did what adult women do and say, well, I have to respect the religion. It is America after all. It isn't like, oh, my bad, I'm doing a black person. Well, I have to respect the religion. This is America after all. It isn't like I have to take it personally. I just ignore it. Or even, well, they learned it from God, so it doesn't make them bad people for being racist against me. See, the racist will say the same as the Jew. I didn't make this up. It was taught to us by God, which, according to Jung, is a symptom of the level of insanity I'm glad I didn't press send yet. These people are living on. The Jew says, quote, oh, they are misinterpreting our higher wisdom and making us look bad. But it is just our religion. And what do blank have to say to not be attacked? And my bad, you. And what do you have to say to not be attacked, slandered, and bullied back by peers, smears, by jeers? I wanted jeers. Auto edit. By jeers, smears, and moans of anti-Semitism. You have to bow down to the Jew insanity and obey their lies by repeating them. And you obey. Quote, when two individuals interact, the sicker person determines the relationship. The more extreme and rigid the person, the greater it's a him or a her, interpersonal pull. The stronger his or her ability to shape the relationship with others. The withdrawn catatonic, the irretrievable criminal, the compulsively flirtatious charmer can inevitably provoke the expected response from a more well-balanced other. We meet here a lowest common denominator process, a Gresham's law of interpersonal collisions. Sick people control the interpersonal reaction. The sicker or more maladaptively rigid, the more power to determine the nature of the relationship. The politics of self-determination, Timothy Leary. Quote, this is from ChatGPT. Me. Translate the Schopenhauer quote. Quam maligna sacerdotar ignorantia noster similat se ignorare, per peccatum primorum parentam nihi aliud intelligi, quam ipsum quotum quod quique manifestum est sed verabatur allegorie januam aspiere ne postea omnia invaderet. ChatGPT, this Latin passage can be translated to English as follows, quote, how maliciously our priestly ignorance pretend not to know what, through the sin of our first parents, is nothing else but sexual intercourse, which is clear to everyone, but in fear to open the door to allegory, lest it should subsequently invade everything, close quote. Me, what does it mean? ChatGPT. This passage appears to be criticizing the way that religious authorities or priests feign ignorance about the nature of sexual intercourse, attributing it solely to the sin of Adam and Eve, our first parents. The author suggests that this is a deliberate pretense. They also mention a fear of opening the door to allegory, which could imply that discussing such matters allegorically or metaphorically might lead to more extensive questioning and examination of religious beliefs and practices. Overall, the passage seems to be critical of the suppression of knowledge or discussion related to sexual matters within a religious context. Close quote. Quote, Wilhelm Reich, in addition to his biophysical heresies, Dr. Wright vastly offended many people by his sociological theory, which holds that fascism is just an exaggerated form of the basic structure of sex-negative societies and has existed under other names in every civilization based on sexual repression. In this theory, the character or muscular armor of the average citizen, a sensitive and frightened attitude anchored in a body reflexes, causes the average person to want a strong authority figure above them. Tyranny in this model is not created by tyrants alone, but by the neurotic masses who want tyrants, close quote. Everything is under control. Conspiracies, cults, and cover-ups. Robert Anton Wilson and Miriam Joan Hill, 1998. Next quote. Quote, the word fascism is not a word of abuse any more than the word capitalism is. It is a concept denoting a very definite kind of mass leadership and mass influence. Authoritarian, one-party system, hence totalitarian, a system in which power takes priority over objective interest and facts are distorted for political purposes. Hence, there are quote-unquote fascist Jews, just as there are quote-unquote fascist Democrats. Close quote. The Mass Psychology of Fascism, Wilhelm Reich, 1946, Chapter 9. Quote, Wilhelm Reich left, this is the ChatGPT, quote, Wilhelm Reich left Germany primarily due to the rise of the Nazi regime and the increasing persecution of those who were considered political dissidents or undesirables by the Nazis. Reich, who was a psychoanalyst and a leftist activist, was targeted by the Nazis for his political beliefs and his work in psychoanalysis, which they deemed un-German and incompatible with their ideology. In 1933, when Adolf Hitler came to power, Reich, who was of Jewish descent and openly critical of the Nazis, saw the writing on the wall and fled Germany. He first went to Austria and then later to several other countries, including Denmark and Norway, before eventually emigrating to the United States in 1939. His departure from Germany was a result of both the political climate and his personal safety concerns due to the Nazis' regime persecution of individuals like him. ChatGPT again. Tim Caff, me. Where did Wilhelm Reich die? ChatGPT. Wilhelm Reich died in the United States. He passed away on November 3rd, 1957, while he was in a federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, where he was serving a sentence for contempt of court related to his work on orgone energy and the distribution of his books and devices. Quote, let's end the quote. Close quote. New quote. 20th century fascism, on the other hand, raises the basic question of man's character, man's human mysticism, and craving for authority, which covered a period of some 4,000 to 6,000 years. The Mass Psychology of Fascism, Wilhelm Reich, 1947. Quote. Next quote. At a crucial date that can be almost precisely fixed at 3200 BC, a new order of humanity which had never before appeared in the history of mankind, namely the professional, full-time, initiated, strictly regimented temple priests. Close quote. The Mask of God, Primitive Mythology, Joseph Campbell, 1991, Part 2, Chapter 3, The Cultural Province of the High Civilizations. Next quote. Lansing's example only underscores the point driven home in the final take of Fatal Attraction. The best single woman is a dead one. Close quote. Parentheses, my parentheses added by Tim Caffrey. Sherry Lansing is a Jewish American actress and former film studio executive. She was the first woman to head a major Hollywood studio. Close quote from the Jewish Virtual Library. Close parentheses. From the book, overall quote from the book, Backlash, the Undeclared War on American Women, Susan Faludi, 1991, page 123. I like that because it's, to me, 123 is a symbol for a no-brainer. It's a significant page in a book. The information I like on pages 123 should be so linearly, symbolically linear in presentation that it's a no-brainer. You have to have a twisted mind to not see the straightforward knowledge. It's just a poetic thing. Anyways, next quote from the same book, if it matters. That year, and just to be cool, Susan Faludi never, ever, 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 ever mentions anything about Jewish people in this book. I read this book, I took notes out of this book, and then 4 years afterwards, I saw an interview with the lady that's coming up over here, Grant, the last quote, this lady, Grant. And in the interview, I saw her start to explain that her name isn't Grant, because I have a friend who's Grant, but his family is a English origin, non-Semitic, so Anglo-Saxon. And so that, that's how our brains work. And then I saw her start to explain in the interview how, she felt she grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, a rich Jewish neighborhood in New York, and she felt that she had to change her name. And that put off red flags for me personally. I thought it's a marketability thing, because I see her entire thing is to attack women, but not to slander Jews. That's how I see it. So even though she knew what she was going to do, she knew, I'm going into this in order to destroy as much stability, sense of security, and sense of self in women as I can, but I don't want people to associate what I'm doing with where I came from. So I'm going to change my name so when I do this evil shit, people don't get it. And when I saw that interview, then I was like, wait, if she did it, how many other of these people in this book, in this war on women, did it? And then I did research and I found these 3 examples of Jewish people participating in the war on women. And the level that they're participating, I think, is very significant, considering the whole relevance of role models that I don't have in this. That now that I think about it, I should put in this. But anyways, okay, so I saw Grant. Anyways, this one is the most significant one. Imagine if a white doctor was doing this about black people. Would you not kill him? So why can a Jewish doctor do this about women and then still and his family hold his wealth today and possibly still be alive? That year, 1985, Dr. Teresa Bernardez was chairing the APA, American Psychiatric Association's Committee on Women, which is supposed to be consulted on all proposed new DSM diagnoses affecting women. But the APA president, Robert Perloff, PhD, leading the panel drafting the new diagnoses, never bothered to inform her or anyone else on the committee. By happenstance, as the APA was nearing a vote on the diagnosis, Bernardez heard about it from a friend across the country. She investigated further and discovered that the APA panel planned to add not 1 but 3 diagnoses affecting women, all in troubling ways. Quote, premenstrual dysphoric disorder, close quote, was another one. A diagnosis that revived the long discredited, I think this should be PMS. I think auto-corrected that. I gotta fix that in the... See, it does it again. Was, I don't know what MPS is. Notions per cycle. Anyways, PMS was a mental illness rather than a simple matter of endocrinology. Quote, paraphilic rapist disorder, close quote, was a third, a diagnosis that the APA panel intended to apply to any man or theoretically women who repeatedly fantasize about rape or sexual molestation and, quote, repeatedly acts on these urges or is markedly distressed by them, close quote. If approved, this vague definition could prove a handy insanity plea for any rapist or child molester with an enterprising lawyer. This was obviously enough to the U.S. Attorney General's office, which, once alerted, even issued an objection. In some ways, that's interesting. In some ways, the masochistic personality disorder may have been the most regressive and peculiar of the 3 proposed disorders. The APA panel, and again, this is the Jewish doctor Perloff doing this. The APA panel, he's hiding behind the panel, just like Grant, the Jewish lady Grant is hiding behind the name Grant. The APA panel had come up with the 9 characteristics to define masochism, and they were strangely broad indeed. They included anyone who, quote, rejects helps, gifts, or favors so as to not be a burden to others, close quote, or, quote, worries excessively, close quote, about troubling others, or, quote, responds to success or positive events by feeling undeserving, close quote. None of the 9 characteristics of this new, quote, unquote, masochism mentioned taking pleasure in pain. Instead, they described only the self-sacrificing and self-denigrating sort of behavior that is supposed to typify femininity. I would have put brackets in certain cultures. In fact, the APA panel went even further, dubbing this problem not only a pathological imbalance, but a quote unquote personality disorder, a category of mental illness that psychiatry defines as least related to social conditions and more rooted in underlying structures of individuals' personality from early childhood, and so most difficult to change. Backlash, Susan Faludi, 1991, Part 4, Backlashing the Effects on Women's Minds, Jobs, and Bodies, Chapter 12, It's All in Your Mind. Popular Psychology joins the Backlash section, Feminine Masochism, 80s Style, page 357 to page 358. Parentheses, Mind added by Timothy Caffrey. Perloff Genealogy, the vast majority of Argentine Jews are descended from immigrants who arrived from Europe. Hebrew surnames, Perloff. There was something else I wanted to say right here. What was it? Oh, that whole thing about this last thing, the personality disorder. The reason they wanted it to be a personality disorder as opposed to, what was the other one? Typify, in fact, the APA when found of dubbing a pathological imbalance. Not only a pathological, not only, so okay, the reason they want it to be a personality that has all these other conditions, underlying structure, individual's personality, is because then they could institutionalize women against their will. So they were plotting this. And institutionalizing, according to that amendment we have, is there is no slavery in America unless you're held by the state. That means, and you say, oh, well, they're going to do any work, but they're making the money. They are become what do you call it? They receive, because they are receiving quote unquote treatment. They are generating economic benefits for the doctors, the pharmaceutical companies, the security staff, and the investors. And therefore, the form of slavery almost looks like anti-slavery, but they're setting up a system so that they can just throw women who didn't want to bow to their system in institutions to prevent them. You got to understand, they're seeing this all has to do with role models. As long as they can control the field of role models accessible to women and girls, they know that they will conform, shut the fuck up. Because the one thing I got to say is, this is where humanity doesn't understand where they got lucky. If this Dr. Teresa Bernardez was Dr. Judy Romney Wagner, she wouldn't have complained. This would have gone through. It would have been like Nazi Germany for women in America, because if a Jewish woman was right there, she wouldn't have done what the Hispanic woman, what the Latino, if you want to call it that, which infers that this woman probably has some Native American ancestry, possibly, but she could just be European Spanish. Anyways, that's a very critical point right there. By the skin of your labia, women barely slid by a situation in which, in America, any man, you don't get it. You think, oh, it has to be like your relative or some shit like that. If you're in a car accident or in a business deal, or a Jewish guy wants to buy your property, okay, and you're not giving it up, and you're a single woman, these were all avenues. They could Palestinian you and throw you in a fucking institution because there's something wrong with you. Well, this woman's just living there by herself. What is wrong with her? Let's get her out of there. She's got to be crazy. So that's a very important thing to note. And plus, I'm trying to really rile up vindictive rage and fucking seething outburst of violent justice against Jews in general. So I'm going to put a little extra salt on it, like they did against Kanye. So here's my last, okay, second to last. Nonetheless, Grant maintains that it was her review of the professional literature that made her reassess her view of independent career women. Her singles research took her first to Freud, whose work, she writes in Being a Woman, brought her to her own concept, biology is destiny. That's when she began to sour on modern working women, who is often going against her nature and her monthly periods. Then she investigated Jung, and from, I think this is supposed to be, both works, she gathered that equality turns a woman into an Amazon, quote, constantly armed and ready for battle, close quote. Okay, that's interesting. So she wants, think about that, constantly armed and ready for battle. She believes, for some reason, that women should not be constantly armed and ready for battle, but there should be disarmed, passive, and vulnerable. Okay? And so what is she doing? She is working towards creating a system in which women do not have a choice to arm up and be ready for battle. Not because she wants to hurt them, because she's trying to help them, because it's against their nature. Duh. It's not like I'm trying to sabotage your life and control you and enslave you to Jewish mythology. No, 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 no. I'm trying to help you because you just don't understand. What does this have to? I've read other books. What does this have to do? Even though Freud's Jew too, and there is no connection between Freud and Jung when it comes into this field of teaching. As a student of Jung and a critic of Freud, I can clearly tell you that this is a gross overstatement to make it seem to infer again superiority of Freud, who's Jewish and completely doing the same thing that she's doing. Everybody else Jewish doing is contaminating non-Jewish frames of mind or perceptions of life with the horrible, disgusting elements of Judaism. In Freud's particular case, the Jewish compulsion, a hyper compulsion to want to have incestual sex with the mother. This goes with the father, the son wanting to become the father. It's deeper than, because it's there and it's very obvious in their shit, but they disconnect it from infant genital mutilation and the physical trauma and psychological trauma that happens at that moment, because they say circumcision doesn't hurt the baby. So therefore, if it doesn't hurt the baby, it doesn't affect the baby. In fact, the only thing Jews say is that it makes the baby's penis more sanitary. Therefore, I'm not doing it to hurt the baby. I'm just doing it to help the baby. Even if what I'm doing doesn't do what I say it does, at least it still makes it look nice and makes it more sanitary. That's the twist. Okay, so let me jump back into this. Okay, always on battle. It makes her, okay, constantly armed and ready for battle, and makes her, quote, severely neurotic in her denial of her biological clock, close quote. She drew from her contemporary scholars too. Her books cite Carol Gilligan in A Different Voice as proof that Simone de Beauvoir's analysis of sex roles is absurd, and that the quest for romance, not legal rights, is the essence of being a woman. Backlash, Choosing for Looting, 1991, Part 4, Backlashing the Effects on Women's Minds, Jobs, and Bodies, Chapter 12, It's All in Your Mind, Popular Psychology, joins the backlash, Tony Grant, Surrender into Womanhood. Parentheses, this is my addition. Quote, Tony Gail Glickman was born in New York City on April 3rd, 1942, and reared in Bayport on Long Island. Seeking to deflect anti-Semitism, her family changed its surname to Grant when she was a young woman. By Margalit Fox, April 6, 2016, New York Times. Last quote, but I think I might have to pull another one up here. When the United States issued a statement supporting equal rights for women in 1948, the United States government was the only one of 22 American nations that wouldn't sign it. So you can't say it's Christianity because those other nations are hardcore Catholic. I'll talk about hardcore, rabidly Catholic. And when you get south of the border, throw in Canada. I mean, Canada didn't, so they signed it. So what is the difference? What is the influence in the American system that revolted us so much that when it came to 1948, so while they're making the Jewish state, think about this. While Jews are working geopolitically to get a Jewish state built, Jews in America are working because again they say, "Oh, we're the oppressed." They ran Hollywood. This is why the last quote I have to put because I wasn't gonna go any further because I got so many freaking quotes in there already. But my bad. Actually, you know what? I think that was the right one. That's funny. That was an accident, but in retrospect, this is the quote, the actual quote that I need. Well, it's hard too because women won't see themselves as disqualifying because they don't. That's okay. You bitches will take it until you don't take it no more. But until then, you're gonna take it, and the Jews are gonna love when you take it because they get off on that. I get off on you getting off. Just a full disclaimer. Oh yeah, I get sexually aroused from women and girls getting off. Jews by suppressing, oppressing, and dominating. Why? Dare I say, because they can't get you off? All right, I think that's good.